You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to a Stimulus Tech Talk. I am Sherry Lipp, Marketing Manager here at Stimulus Technologies, and I am excited for our discussion today. I'll be talking to our CEO, Nathan Whitaker, about encryption, and I don't think I'm alone in feeling like I don't know a lot about encryption, so I'm looking forward to learning more. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Sherry. It's good to be here.
So to get started, let's talk about why encryption is important for businesses to think about.
Well, there's actually a lot about encryption that's important. And so basically, encryption is taking data that you have, whether it's data that contains person identifiable information or information that might be, risky to hold, or contains a lot of risk from a compliance purposes, like credit card numbers, social security numbers, home addresses, birth dates, things like that. That, if it got out into the public, it could cause your business or your employees or your customers issues. And so what we want to do is, from an IT perspective, if you have to have that data stored, is we want to have it stored in a manner or transmitted in a manner that a hacker couldn't access it either directly or indirectly. And so encryption is taking that data and using certain sets of technology, whether it's a combination of some type of passphrase or code or key that you have to be able to access that data. And when we talk about data, it's we have to look at it, what we call in the security world, either at rest or in transit. So at rest means it's just kind of like it sounds, it's stored somewhere. And then in transit is when you're trying to communicate it with somebody else. So we have to look at both sides of encryption when dealing with data, especially personally identifiable information or critical data for your business or your customers.
Okay, so when I've thought about encryption, I've usually thought about encrypted emails, but so we're encrypting data that is actually being stored too.
Correct. So encrypted emails would fall into that in-transit category where you're communicating that data with somebody else. Stored is important because we're living in a mobile society now, and I have a laptop. Most people have some type of mobile device, and if there's data that's PII or under compliance or whatever it may be, that should be encrypted also. In whatever storage medium that it is.
Is there data that you listed off quite a few things that are kind of on the more obvious side as far as personal information and private information? Is there anything that people might not think of as needing to be encrypted?
I think anything that is important from a business perspective, anything that's important to your company, and if it got outside your organization, it could cause you harm. So maybe think about customer lists might be important. Maybe it doesn't have PII with it, but it is kind of your bread and butter for your business. So, if that information got out, potentially invoicing, because hackers, want to use invoicing as a potential threat to your company to get access to your vendors. Intellectual property inside your organization. So if you have like a secret sauce, or even, as far as patents go, or, procedures inside your company, those also should be encrypted, just for the reason that if that information got outside your organization, it could do you harm. Just a quick story on that to think about is, for example, I mentioned customer lists. Let's say and this is a story that I know about recently, so I'll share it directly. Let's say, or this organization that I know of had some employees that they didn't know were disgruntled while they were working for them. And, they sent to themselves or took as they were planning on leaving, customer lists, invoices, the way that they were doing business with these customers. And then the employees left and started a competitive company against this organization. And they were bound under non-compete agreements. But in the end, the harm was done by having that information that was able to leave the organization and no way to, delete that data, post transmission. So, think about any data that might, compromise your organization could be encrypted. And there's ways, and that's a little bit more difficult to stop it once it's left your organization, but there's even ways to do that. The other thing I think about is like passwords are really important to be encrypted inside our organization. We have access to a lot of passwords to a lot of people, as most managed service providers do, and internal passwords to our systems. And so if an employee leaves our organization, we have to identify, what passwords that employee had access to, and that all that data is encrypted. And if they ever leave, we go in and change those passwords and disable access to that encrypted system to the employees. So, there's a lot of data inside your organization that you might not think about that is critical to the operations of the company. They should be encrypted.
Okay. So we've talked about compliance in the last, couple of podcasts, including one about compliance. Are there legal requirements for encryption?
There are a lot of legal requirements, and both federally from working with the federal government or the U.S. But ironically, Nevada, where our headquarters is one of the first states that passed a state rule on required encryption for a person identifiable information that's being transmitted. So most states have now followed that along, and that any data that has PII, and that could be social security numbers, birth dates, even linking a name with an address, it needs to be encrypted when transmitted. And then at storage at rest, there's, depending on what compliance we might be under, if you're a CPA firm, if you're HIPAA, that data now needs to be encrypted at rest and in transit. So there's a lot of federal regulations depending on what type of company you are, but for all businesses, most states now have some type of encryption requirement that requires businesses to encrypt data when it's being transmitted. So it's I think it affects all businesses, and it's just good hygiene. It's good practice to do that. And it's hard. I get it. I deal with this periodically. I'm working with outside vendors or customers even, and maybe attorney firms, things like that, and they want you to send data. Just send me an email with this credit app filled out, and it includes bank account information, social security numbers, and I have to remind these vendors all the time that I'm not going to send that via email because it's that's could be intercepted, and that information can get out. So it's important for all of us to be vigilant about that, especially with dealing with other companies or our customers or vendors. And if a customer, it's not the fault of the business if the customer starts it, maybe send some information unencrypted, but certainly the business needs to take the responsibility to stop that communication unencrypted and go through a different method to get, and make it easy as possible to get that information back and forth in the future.
And what repercussions might a business face if they're not using proper encryption?
So there's what's known as the red flags rule, which kind of encompasses a lot of this. If, let's just use an example, let's say you have some PII that's stored on a laptop. And, great example of this is a few years ago, there was a laptop stolen by the federal government that, millions of social security numbers, I believe it were veterans, were leaked, were lost, and they were stored unencrypted on this laptop. So, there could be major suits that happen against the organization. You might, as a company, have to pay for credit monitoring of your customers, especially if you're dealing with, residents, people, individuals, consumers. You could, in some states, impose fines. I know, for example, California itself, on top of any federal fines with a HIPAA violation, but California puts a $10,000 per patient record fine for lost data. So let's say a hacker gets into your system, is able to get access to patient records. Those patient records, let's say you're a small, single practitioner, but you might have 500 or 1,000 patient records. If those get lost, it's per patient record. So that could be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of fines that the state of California could impose on top of federal government impositions of fines. So it's lost trust in your business because you have to notify your customers. I'm sure we've all gotten the letters in the past. Hey, you were part of a data breach. Your information might have gotten out. You can sign up for credit monitoring, and then you think twice about doing business with that company again. And then, obviously the legal side of things that you might have to, notify the regulators, maybe pay fines associated with it if you're not doing the right things. It just opens up a huge can of worms, both from a customer perspective and a regulatory perspective. So it's important to take this really seriously because it does come with a huge cost if not done properly.
And are there ways, and somebody, like, I guess I might be thinking more of the in transit, that an employee can circumvent encrypting data, to avoid kind of the having to take those steps to do it?
Well, you can always, through email systems, you can always enforce encryption. There's ways to do that. It's a little bit more difficult. And this is a little bit different conversation, but, identifying and segregating your data so that not everybody has access to the data. It also is employee training, because 99% of the time it's just employees not being trained or the system's too difficult to follow. So, proper employee training to make sure that they understand their responsibility of, only sending encrypted data if there's confidential information, and making sure they receive it, but making the systems as easy as possible. So, for example, in our system with email that we supply to our customers, there's a little button that says encrypt your email. So it's as easy as just clicking a button saying I need to send this email encrypted, and it encrypts it, and the user on the other side has an easy way to get access to it. So making it as simple as possible. When dealing with vendors and things, ask them if they have a portal to upload data to, and again, just ensuring that's occurring. One thing I would mention at rest, I think it's important. I mentioned laptops a few times, but there's an easy way built into Microsoft Windows that you can do a full drive encryption on all devices. And it requires you to have a business computer, which I recommend to all our clients have, a professional computer, and a professional version of Windows too. So, if you go down to your local, consumer store and buy a machine, it's usually coming with a home edition. So it has to be a business edition or professional edition of Windows, an actual business computer. And you could do a full drive encryption for free. It's built into the machine itself. And that protects you from that stolen laptop scenario. One thing, talking to companies periodically is they say, well, all that data is in our CRM or in our accounting system. But, you get onto the individual users' computers and you realize that they're, exporting Excel documents, printing, doing print to PDF. And those are all stored in temporary folders or maybe the document folders on the machine. And once you do a scan, you realize there's actually a ton of PII that's been stored on that computer that's been exported outside of those systems. So it's really important to either, have the employees wipe that and make sure that drive is fully encrypted, because, you can't 100% trust employees are going to be clean on their data. So free option, get the full drive encryption. It's also available on Mac too, on their Pro version. So I recommend that everybody has full drive encryption. It's an easy insurance policy.
So if a business is new or hasn't done it or has come into data that they didn't need to encrypt before, but now they, new data, what steps should they take to begin this process? Is it something they can do on their own, or should they work with a professional?
I think the first thing is working with a professional that can do an audit of the system. Some type of network scan or computer device scan to identify where that data is at. Because a lot of times, if they're not familiar with this and they need to implement it, they might not know where all their data is at. So working with a professional that can do these scans, looking for PII on the systems, helps them identify it. Doing full drive encryption is pretty simple. It might be a little bit more complex if you're always interacting with clients. Let's say you're a CPA firm. It might be a little bit more complicated setting up like a online portal or some way for your customers to get access to or to send you data, because that's usually where the issue is a customer or client sends you data that should be encrypted, and then make it easy for them. Say, we don't accept any data except through our portal, and that you might have need to have a security professional help you set that up, or an IT professional. So I do think this is an important enough topic that or issue that having professionals help you with this is really important.
Are there any common methods for encryption, or is it tailored to an individual's business or an individual business?
Well, there's certainly, like I mentioned, the full drive encryption is built into both Windows and Mac. So that's a common method. Email systems, there's a ton out there that allow for that ease of encryption. Some of them are built into Microsoft 365, so you can have your IT people enable that as an option. We like using the third party because it's usually a little bit simpler than the 365 built-in systems. But then the online portals, there's quite a few out there that are available. One thing to note is a lot of the online systems like Dropbox or OneDrive or Box.com, those systems don't default have encryption built into them. So you need to make sure that you're using the professional version or the enterprise version that would have built-in encryption. So choosing those online storage systems, ShareFile, Dropbox, SharePoint, all those require you to make sure that you have encryption enabled or buying a product that has encryption when storing data in there at rest. So that's one thing I'd recommend looking into. So, it is a complicated topic. Some of it's pretty easy to do. Some of it actually takes a little bit more thought and time to set up.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Nathan. This is very useful information. I learned a lot. So thank you.
As always, thank you, Sherry. Have a great day, everybody.